Hello and welcome to a brand new video. As regular viewers of the channel can tell, I'm not in my usual space right now. Yes, I have been moving. That is part of the reason why the content has been so slow recently. I apologize for that. Stuff happened. I had to move. I didn't really get a chance to make content beforehand that I could easily schedule to publish out, so I kind of apologize for not planning that properly, but now I'm moved in. Things are sort of starting to get rolling again. I've still got some big projects that I've been working on for a while now that are starting to come out, but I wanted something that I could put out in this new place so that you guys don't have to wait another 2-3 weeks to get some content. And then somebody, I should have looked at the name, Parky Cod, said you should do another Hot Takes video. It's been a crazy season. It's a crazy time for MotoGP in general with Liberty Media acquisition and these new regulations coming. My name is B, this is the Beehive Paddock, and in this video I'm responding to your MotoGP Hot Takes. Again, the most liked comment under this post comes from Deviate Fishy, who says Morbidelli should have had at least one race ban by now. This one is, and people seem to be in agreement with this, it has the most likes, and there's a couple of comments that are saying like, yeah, this is a cold take. I actually don't agree. Morbidelli has pissed me off more than any other rider this year. Not only has he been reckless and dangerous on the track, but he has also been completely like flippant about it in the media, and then when he gets taken out he says like that Aleix Espargaro has some sort of evil vendetta against him when it clearly was not Espargaro's intention to take him out. I really dislike that sort of hypocrisy. If you're going to ride aggressively and take other riders out, which you shouldn't do, but if you are going to be somebody who does that, you shouldn't get pissed off when somebody hits you in a racing incident. That's not something that you should be doing, and just I think that shows a general lack of self-awareness. In terms of the race ban, I do see the argument for it. You know, he's taken out I think 3 different riders now, as well as incidents with track marshals and impeding the line in practice and stuff. For me, a race ban is like if you're clearly breaking like some sort of sporting or technological rule. Like, we've had like substance abuse bans in the past, Anthony West, Andrea Iannone, and then stuff like earlier this year Ayagura with using the wrong ECU spec. That's a retroactive race disqualification. Those are very clear incidents to me, and I think that if Morbidelli had like clearly intentionally committed any of these incidents, he should absolutely get a race ban. If I'm remembering the statement correctly, his next offense will result in a ride-through penalty, and then the one after that will result in a race ban. I think we should be one step like sort of ahead in that process. He should have already had the ride-through penalty, and I think the next step should be the race ban. That's where I think we should be right now, because he's had a lot of bad incidents, but a full race ban is something that I'm not sure that we're there like just quite yet. But I can completely understand this point of view. Sam Williams 78 says the 800s were the best sounding bikes in the last 25 years, including the last of the 500s. Also, criticizing a rider for being a champion only because of being on the best bike is a bit silly. The best riders always want the best machines. Champions are usually found aboard the best bikes. The first part of this take, I just personally, it's complete personal preference. I do think that is a hot take, but I personally disagree. The sound of a two-stroke does something to me. So, can't agree with you there, but I appreciate your opinion. I do think that is a hot take. The other one I really, really like, because I think I'm seeing a lot of criticism. There's a few hot takes in this that are basically Pecco Bagnaia is overrated because he's been on the best bike for the last 4 years. I don't really think that that's fair. Is Valentino Rossi overrated because he was on a Honda for his first championship winning years? Is Marc Marquez overrated because he was on a Honda? No, they got those rides because they were very promising in the lower classes, and then they turned out to be great riders. With that being said, it's important to use context. There is a reason why people value Valentino Rossi's 2004 championship so much. But that's because he came in on a bike that was so much worse than the Honda and even the Ducati that had just entered the year prior, and he was able to transform that and immediately win a world championship on it. That's not something that happens very often at all. So you typically do find world champions on the best bikes because that's where world championship level talent tends to go to. It just makes sense, and I think that it's important to use context, such as like Agostini was on the best bike from 68 to 70 and he went undefeated, but do I think that those undefeated championships would be worth the same as somebody on a Ducati today doing an undefeated championship? No, I don't. The one today would obviously be worth way, way more because of the level of talent and factories that are present in the championship today compared to Agostini's time. both are impressive, one of them clearly has more value than the other. Almost every, if not every, world champion in history has been on a very competitive bike in their championship winning season, but it's important to use context to figure out which ones are more valuable than others. Ooh, from Samuel Triolone. Marini is currently the most underrated rider on the grid. I think Mir is probably right up there with him. I see there's just so much Joan Mir hate because of the way that he won his championship, but Marini just goes so under the radar and ignored when he's had just a really solid season this year, like a very solid year, especially after the injury coming back. He's been really good. So yeah, I think Luca Marini might be the most underrated rider on the grid. He's certainly in the conversation, at the very least. Giomonta17 has 3 takes. First one is, if Quartararo had a Ducati from 2021 to today, he'd be at least a 4-time MotoGP champion. I don't really think there's any way to know that. I think he'd have more than 1. I'm not confident saying he'd have 4. Rainey is the most underrated Premier Class champion. Lorenzo is the second. That's the take I really want to get into. The thing about Wayne Rainey to me, Wayne Rainey is a great rider, a fantastic rider. The thing about Rainey to me is a lot of people seem to overrate him really, really high, and a lot of people seem to underrate him really, really low, and it sort of balances out, and everyone thinks that the opposite is true. And because of that, I think it pushes people to either overrate or underrate him more. I mean, there's people who try and argue that he's the greatest of all time, which, if you think greatest equals most skill, go ahead, pick Rainey. It's literally impossible to compare skill between eras. But for me, and I've mentioned this before, people really tend to think that everything would have just gone well for riders who got injured or had their careers cut short in some way, and they tend to overrate them because of that. But at the same time, he was an incredible talent, incredibly high win rate, came in, won 3 world championships in his first 5 years in the Premier Class, absolute legend of the sport, deserves to be up there. And I think ultimately I don't think he would have gone on some insane championship winning streak with the way that Schwantz's career was progressing and Doohan coming back from the injury. I do think that if he hadn't gotten injured, we would have had Rainey, Schwantz, and Doohan all the way or most of the way through the 90s, and that would have been just absolutely incredible. So I guess in order for me to really give a verdict on whether or not I think he's underrated, I guess you would need to tell me how you think he's rated, because I see a lot of different opinions about Rainey. I know I've mentioned this before. I think in my first Hot Takes video, I think Lorenzo is properly rated. I will say I think the most underrated Premier Class champion of all time is Jeff Duke, and I don't think it's very close. 4-time Premier Class champion, the first three-peat, an absolutely insane win rate, the first to win titles with 2 different manufacturers in the Premier Class, and the last to do it until Agostini 20 years later. He was the OG GOAT, and I think that people forget that way too easily. Next up is Johnny's, who has 2 takes. Take 1, rider turnover is way too low. MotoGP needs to be more cutthroat to be taken seriously. More average performing guys like Miller, Rins, and Vinales need to be cut each year to give young blood a chance. It's a sin that Manu Gonzalez can't get a ride yet next year. I sort of agree with this, but I also think turnover's way too high in a weird way. I think that MotoGP is allergic to cutting riders who have made a name for themselves, such as a Vinales, a Miller, and a Rins. And new riders are given this awful burden to prove themselves immediately. Like Remy Gardner, gone after a year. Augusto Fernandez, gone after 2 years. And it's, these are Moto2 champions. They only get a very short amount of time to prove themselves, when in reality there's riders who probably aren't going to get so much better that you could, I think, maybe afford to get rid of to bring in new talent. At the same time, I'm a very optimistic fan in general. I like most of the riders on the grid at any given time, so I kind of want to keep most of them around. In terms of Manu Gonzalez, he's just winning the championship in an unfortunate year because there's new regulations coming in 27. Almost everyone already has a contract through 26 to free themselves up for 27. So there were very, very limited seats that he could have gotten in the first place. I don't think that's the fault of rider turnover as much as just the situation right now. From Excitedon 9861, Alex Rins should not have a factory ride in 2026, but yet he does. In terms of his talent, his skill, his ability on the bike right now, I agree with you. Not his fault, unfortunately. I think his injuries are probably still plaguing him a little more than he wants to admit, and he's on an awful bike. Should he have a factory ride? No. However, I am very, very glad that Yamaha are sticking to their contract. Considering everything that happened this year, I'm glad that we're not going down a route where contracts are just meaningless anymore. I do think that those types of agreements should be upheld. Rins has a contract through 2026, therefore he is keeping the ride through 2026, and I'm grateful to see that. Alright, it's B from the future, doing a voiceover. The Indonesian Grand Prix has since happened. Alex Rins had a fantastic weekend, and I went back and looked, and I don't want to misrepresent. Exciton did change their opinion. They are now an Alex Rins supporter. I am going to stand on business and say that I don't think that one good weekend means that Alex Rins suddenly deserves the factory ride. I think there's riders on independent teams who are much more deserving of a factory seat based on their current performance. Again, not trying to take anything away from Rins. Great rider, has shown incredible promise and incredible upside. It's just a shame how his career has turned out so far. However, I'm not going to do a 180 on the stake because of one good weekend that he had. It was amazing to see. It was awesome. I was really rooting for him to get on the podium. It was a shame what happened at the end of the race. However, it's not enough to make me change my opinion here. Although again, I am still glad that he's keeping the ride. KTM is closer to winning a title than Yamaha. I don't think this is true. I think that KTM's development is probably hindered a lot more than Yamaha's right now. I don't see either of them winning a title in 26, and then in 27 when the new regulations come in, I think Yamaha has significantly more R&D budget and probably has a head start on KTM by a long ways, because KTM, if I had to guess, probably had to stop working on their 27 project during the financial crisis. So ultimately, I think Yamaha are closer to winning in the new regulation cycle than KTM will be, but we'll see how true that is because in reality, nobody knows. The Jinx 1997 says Pramac Yamaha should have opted for a lineup including Oliveira and not Miller. I personally disagree. I think in terms of their pure riding abilities, Miller and Oliveira are probably going to be able to get about the same amount of stuff done next year. However, I have heard that Miller is a very good development rider. He's very good at explaining what's happening on the bike underneath him, and I think that Yamaha, with this new V4 project, probably value that more, so it's sort of like employing a full-time test rider. And I think that that's something that they probably value a lot, and I don't really expect to see him stay with Yamaha in 27. I would not be surprised to see him go to a full, test rider position. From ESCT Dyer Westfield, I'm sorry. There aren't any top riders in Moto2 currently. None will be successful in MotoGP, and most have already missed their chance. Really? None? There's no top riders in Moto2 right now? With the potential exception of Moreira, I don't think that any of the top riders in Moto2 right now will be successful in MotoGP, but I think that some of the younger riders sure do have a chance. I don't think that Colin Vire will ever be a world champion, but he could sneak a race win in, Jack Miller style, in MotoGP. And then you've got the obvious ones are David Alonso and Daniel Holgado. I mean, they're looking incredible as Moto2 rookies, which is something really difficult to do for a lot of riders. I mean, it's really tough to ignore them at this point. I'm not particularly confident in agreeing with you there. And I think that Moreira definitely has the potential to be successful in Moto2. I think that you're right that a lot of the seasoned Moto2 riders probably won't find any success in MotoGP, but there's some fresher talent that looks really good. I like this one a lot. From Dark Side of Motorsport 0309, if you put the riders from the 80s and 90s, Rainey, Lawson, Schwantz, Doohan, Spencer, etc., on nowadays bikes with proper training, they could compete for wins and championships. I will take this a step further. I will go a step further and I'll say that any of the greats from any era, if you train them properly, could do fine on any other era's bikes. So I think that any of Duke, Surtees, Halewood, Agostini, Sheen, Spencer, Roberts, all the guys that you mentioned, Doohan, Stoner, Lorenzo, Rossi. I think you take any of those guys and you train them by the way, proper training is really interesting, and it really depends on what you mean, because proper training nowadays is starting racing at age 4 and 5. So if you start any of those guys from that young, I think it'll work out. What you often hear people say, crew chiefs and journalists and people who've been in the paddock for a really long time, is that what separates really good riders from all-time great riders is having the talent and then also having the technical knowledge necessary to explain what's happening underneath you, to be able to help develop a machine. And that's what you see with like Jeff Duke. John Surtees, I think, has an honorary doctorate in engineering from Oxford or something. You know, Agostini was crucial in the development of MV's 353. And then, you know, everything that the riders in the 80s had to go through was incredible. But yeah, I think that you take any of these guys who are great racers as well as great racing minds and you put them on any other era's bike, they can figure it out well enough. From Random's Bossman 1, honestly, Rossi's 2011 to 2012 tenure wasn't as bad as people make it out. I don't think it's as bad as people make it out at all. I completely agree with you. You know, he was still securing podiums. There were races where he was fighting for wins. It's just that by his standards, it was pretty awful. I mean, you look at even like Marc Marquez from 2021 to 2023, it's like that is like a really like the darkest period in his career by far. It's very, very dark. But for a fair bit of that time, if you give that career to like an average rider, that's like a solid career. There's multiple wins in there. There's some podiums. It gets pretty rough towards the end, but you know, minus the injuries, you look at just these results and you say that's a decent time. And I think it's the same thing with Rossi's Ducati tenure. He was just a great rider on a bad bike, and I think that comes out to being like pretty above average. From Reyes Severt, greatest of all time should only be between Marquez and Agostini now, and anyone still arguing for Rossi is doing it out of nostalgia or factionism. Dog, am I old? What do you mean Rossi is like nostalgia? I really don't agree with this. I think that Rossi still has a very valid claim to this title. He's the most Premier Class wins. He's equal to Marquez on titles, and he has some very, very strong titles. 2002 and 2003 are very strong. 2004, you've obviously got him going to Yamaha, and he's the only rider ever to win in 4 different classes. And again, if you count the 800s as a different class, that's 5 different classes. He's showed an incredible amount of talent. I think he absolutely has a place in the GOAT debate. From Octavio Santos, Loris Capirossi is the most overestimated MotoGP rider ever. No. From Pipo Zizo, this is one I really wanted to talk about. Moto2 is overrated. Moto3 and MotoGP do everything better. Way better, actually. I understand why it's there, and why only 2 riders made the direct jump from Moto3 to MotoGP in the last 15 years, but I just cannot bring myself to watch these series ever since the amazing Gardner/Fernandez or Agura/Vietti/Augusto title fights a few years back. I feel like most years this is a pretty cold take, because most of the time, you know, MotoGP is the top level, everyone's going to watch it. Moto3 has like pack racing that's super spectacular to watch on a week-to-week basis, but like this year in particular is really like exemplary of, I think, Moto2's best. It has, you know, the only real title fight that we've got this year. It's by far like the best in terms of a championship race. So I feel like I fully believe you that you haven't been watching, because I don't think you would have written this if you've been watching this year. I really encourage you to give it a watch, because you get riders who have come out of the woodwork to start being competitors for wins. We have a genuine like 3-way title fight, even if some people are trying to throw it away. And we've had some amazing races. I do think it is worth watching, at least in my opinion, but I think everything's worth watching. From Mateus Macedo, 54-53, Acosta is not as good as we all thought. I don't think it's particularly fair to judge him just yet. I think he had a above average rookie season, and is now in a situation where we still don't know the full extent to which KTM's financial crisis has impacted that bike this year. He's looked a lot stronger since the summer break than he did before the summer break, so maybe they finally got some mid-season upgrades going, and I think that's just a lot more plausible than he's just not as good as we all thought. Give the man some time. From Lovelessissimo, Ducati has pretty much ignored Pecco and his problems in favor of keeping Marc on the top step. No, I truly don't know where this conspiracy has come from. Why would a factory ever want their riders to not finish first and second? Gigi Dall'Igna is famously very proud of that motorcycle. He worked hard to get it to the top, and I think that he cares a lot more about his bike winning than he does either rider winning. And you look at Pecco's season, and he has consistently, time and time again, said, we found something. They are actively working on it, you can tell, because he continuously says, oh, we're trying these new brake discs, we moved something by 2 centimeters, and it has continuously not worked. But the efforts have been there. They have been trying stuff. It's just, for whatever reason, this new recent change, which they're not saying, which I think is probably a good sign that it might actually be legitimate, is working out. From FIA random penalty generator M5044, unless you rode the 500cc era without electronic aids, you're not even close to consideration as a GOAT. No. It's not the same racing, but that doesn't mean that it's any less difficult or requires any less skill. I think the average level of talent on the grid right now is significantly higher than it ever was in the two-stroke era. So no, I wholeheartedly disagree with this. Trying to control these 300 horsepower beasts for 40 minutes, hitting speeds that have never been hit before by any previous era, and dealing with just the rigorously long schedules of modern racing and all of the things that come with that and all the difficulties that come with that are also things that deserve validation. I do think that we should be doing away with quite a few of the electronics and rider aids, not all of them, but quite a few of them. However, I think that trying to say that a rider isn't one of the greatest ever simply because they weren't even given the opportunity to ride in the 500cc era is wrong. And finally, from the man himself who requested the video, Parky Cod. 2 takes here. First one, I think Sete Gibernau should have stayed on Honda in 2006 and ridden for Fortuna over Elias. Gibernau showed multiple times in 05 and 06 that he had the pace to stay in the front, and Elias's career was lackluster on Fortuna at that point. Gibernau on a factory spec Honda in Rossi's worst career year at that point breaks the Qatar curse. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that if Gibernau had that seat, he probably would have won at least one race and would have broken the Qatar curse. Second, Randy de Puniet hurt his career before it was started by joining the Premier class in 06. He was a title contender in the 250 class and had good pace. If he stayed to fight it out a couple years like Davi and Lorenzo did, I think he earns a factory ride in the 800cc era and doesn't waste away in Kawasaki. I'm going to say that I personally probably disagree with you here. However, I think that ultimately it's really impossible to know. What I will say is that in his last year in the 250s, he didn't really show a whole lot of promise. He, finished significantly worse in the point standings than he did the year prior. Despite if he had switched back to a different bike and maybe gotten better, or if he'd maybe made the Aprilia work and gotten it to where he was before, even won a championship over the next couple years in the 250s, what are the odds of that compared to what are the odds that he just continues to waste away on the Aprilia, or not make it work, or get a worse bike, or whatever scenario you want to have happen? I think there's a lot more potential bad than potential good that comes out of staying in the 250s for him at that point. Whereas he was given a seat on a, it's difficult to remember because of their performance, but the Kawasaki's were a factory bike. It's simply not a successful factory bike. So he was, probably lured in by, oh, we're a factory, we're working on all this development, look at all this support that we have. As much as we know how it worked out now, it would be completely inadvisable to go back and tell him that he should turn down that offer, because I think that at the time it was probably seemed like the perfect move. Thank you to everyone who submitted takes. I remember the first time I did this, I think I had to promote it in videos and just barely got enough takes to make it, and now I feel awful because I got over 100 comments and am not able to respond to them all. So if you didn't get your take responded to in this video, I apologize. I simply didn't. If you enjoyed, please like, subscribe, and hype this video. I feel like a stupid social media influencer saying that, but I mean, I guess I am, so. And a very special thank you to my channel members: MVP2112, Venturian CRO, Sean, Motosapien B, Jack, the world's fastest Maori, Drew Gibbs, Really Very Bored 1, Carl Ruppersberg, Schmalutin, Troy the Boy, Moneypenny, ASX91, Luis Campos, and Ian Ellison. These are the guys and gals who help keep the channel running. I appreciate them greatly. If you would like to support the channel in the best way possible, please become a channel member. One final thank you to watching for everyone, and have a fantastic day.